I can hopefully reassure you that this is as fresh to me today as it was when we started out on this journey. There's an awful lot for us to do, and there are an awful lot of opportunities that sit ahead of us, as well as some problems that we will have to cure as we go forward. So again, thank you all very much, and thank you, Councillor Humby, for nominating, and Councillor Tony for seconding. But that's really kind. So we now come to the nomination of the vice chair, and I would be happy to nominate Councillor Tony Page as my vice chair. Is there anyone that would second that?
Yeah, I'm very happy to second that, Mr. Chairman. Rob Humby, yeah.
Thank you very much. Are there any other nominations? Anybody against would probably be the easiest way to do it. I'm looking in the hands up. Okay,
no,
so
thank you for the nomination, Chair and Rob.
And so I declare you vice chair for another year, Tony. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if I go to the back end of here, we now have to agree to the co-opt for a period of 1 year to the partnership board. The two people nominated collectively by the local enterprise partnership, a person nominated by the national parks, and I don't know if we need to name these at the moment, Rupert, or are we just going to take them as recommended?
Chairman, if I may, I think just that recommendation that you appoint the chair of the Transport Forum, and the recommendation is that Jeff French be appointed as chair of the Transport Forum. Yep. And then the two representatives are Daniel Ruiz and Martin Harris from EM3 and C2C LEPS accordingly. The two borough and district representatives, which I believe are Daniel Humphreys and David Monk, and then the National Park, the Protected Landscapes one, my understanding is that is Ian Phillips.
Okay, and we go on to talk about representative from Highway England, Network Rail Transport for London, and the allocated voting rights as printed. So are we happy to accept all of those as printed and nominated?
Agreed, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Okay, on to agenda item 5 then. Thank you all of your nominated people for your interest in TFSE, and I'm sure we're going to have an interesting year ahead of us. Agenda item 5, statements from the public. There have been no statements requested. So,
Keith, have you skipped that final? Sorry to butt in, but didn't Rupert raise a future arrangements item on this heading, or are we dealing with that later?
No, I did, Tony. You beat me to it.
Apologies.
Chairman, if I may, just noting the proposals for the governance member subgroup, i.e. reconvening that in the autumn. And then there's for the board to consider future meeting arrangements for the partnership board. And then just a final point that we would request that members of the board complete their register of interest forms where they haven't yet done so.
That will teach me to get to the end of my briefing instead of following it through. Apologies for that. Member of the subgroup reconvenes in autumn 2021 following the final report of the future development. We'll need to oversee the implementation of recommendations. So volunteers for membership of the subgroup, have we? Can somebody tell me who we've currently got and who we need to bring forward?
I've been chairing it and quite happy to continue that, Chair, but I know we're going to have to get at least one replacement because Michael Payne was on and various others. Sorry, Rupert, you were about to
No, thank you, Tony. You're absolutely right. Councillor Page chaired. Other members were Councillor Humby, Councillor Payne, Ross McNally representing the LEPS, and I think that was it, but absolutely right in terms of Councillor Payne has obviously been replaced So if there are, with your indulgence, Chair, if members wish to be on the governance subgroup, if they were to let the Secretariat know, then that's probably the simplest way of proceeding. If you're content, and if Tony's to be the chair, he's content with that.
Thank you for that, Councillor Humby. I hope you're happy to continue.
Yeah, I was just going to say, very happy for Tony to continue to chair and very happy to stay on that group. Is there also a replacement for Ross McNally, or have I got that wrong, Rupert?
Yes, there is. So Daniel Ruiz will be replacing. That's the LEP's recommendation, and I think we'd be very happy with Daniel if that's if he was willing to do that.
And I'd be very happy to support that as well.
Thank you, Rob. I will do it.
Good.
Thank you. So we're happy with that. We're one member short, and so if members that are interested in going on to that subcommittee could let Secretariat know, then we can endorse that when we have the nomination. But thank you very much. So meeting arrangements for 2021-22. I was really hoping that we could have held the AGM in person. It was simply because of COVID. The hotels around Gatwick were not available, and trying to find somewhere else, and not having any surety that the 19th would occur. We've ended up being virtual, but I mean, my personal view is that we do need to meet occasionally. We don't need to meet every time. I'm sure the frequency of the meetings are such that we can do alternate or whatever. I'm up for proposals from any of you.
Mr. Chairman, then, if I may, then I think it would be very useful to have some meetings in person. The frequency is yet to be decided. I'm not sure if it's every other one, but clearly it's easier for most of us to have them virtual, and most of the time we can. So it's just agreement. And that might even depend on the agenda item, Mr. Chairman, I would have thought. I mean, possibly leave that flexible and do that by agreement with the agenda, but as long as there's plenty of warning to do so, of course.
Yeah. Okay. I can see a hand up, but I can't see who it is. Oh, it's Tony.
Yeah, I would agree with Rob. I think the advantage, obviously, of having had the meetings at Gatwick is that it's reasonably accessible for all of us, and therefore a central location is obviously likely to maximise attendance. I'm happy to offer Reading again, but I appreciate that for people, for example, from Kent and from your part of the world, it may be regarded as a lengthy schlep across here, and I agree with Rob. I think we can never really get to know each other in this format, particularly with new members. I mean, you, Rob, and I, and Roger, and various and Jeffrey know each other for a number of years, but for newcomers, to get to know people, we do need, I would suggest, at least an early meeting of all of us, and I think whether there's a hybrid facility, I don't particularly like hybrid meetings because the people, it works technically, but the people on the screen are always on the outside looking in, no matter how good the chair tries to be, and certainly that's my experience of hybrid meetings. I would agree with Rob that we should look to have, ideally I would have hoped the next meeting, but I would hope that obviously there's something substantive and meaty on the agenda that can then justify that attendance in person. But other than that, I think we're going to have to live with the reality of Teams meetings for at least some of the time, even though I'm beginning to hate it. And even though some of us constantly fail to unmute, but then some people regard that as an advantage. And you, of course, Chair, at the centre, can mute all of us. So that's all for me.
Thank you, Tony. I think that, does anyone else want to speak?
Oh no, sorry, it's Jeff French. I was going to say I totally supported what the others have just said. It would be useful to have at least a meeting, especially whilst new members are still new, if possible, so they have a chance just to chat over coffee or whatever.
Thank you. Rupert, did you want to add something before I come back?
I've just, if members wanted to, we could prepare an option for you, perhaps just based on alternate virtual versus face-to-face, perhaps set out a couple of options, and we can do that virtually, and we could, Chairman, if you're content, go with the majority view on a couple of options.
Certainly happy to look at options. I just agree with what's been said earlier. It'd be really good while we are new to get to know the following board members in person. So if we can do that sooner rather than later, that would be my preference. So we'll see how that one goes. Rob, you had your hand up. Have you?
Yeah. Sorry. I mean, you pretty well just said it. I mean, I know Tony said only if there's something meaty on the agenda. Well, I would have thought that doesn't matter. I think that, the next meeting to get everybody together to meet the new people, it's really helps in terms of partnership working to actually stand in front of the people you're talking to. So I would very much propose that we try and have the next one subject to various conditions, obviously in person. And then, like I say, either we can have an agreement of every other one, or we do it by depending on what's on the agenda, I would have thought.
Is there anybody violently disagreeing with that? No. Is that enough for you and the team to go away and work something up, Rupert?
Yeah, absolutely, Chairman. We'll endeavour to make the next meeting, which I believe is in September or October, in person. And then we'll set out either alternating, or we'll have a look at what we might be coming up on the agenda. Excellent.
Good stuff. And if you've got any other thoughts, members, just feed them into to the team. It's good that they know what you're thinking, so please do that. Register of interests. I'm sure we all know that that we need to complete that and see where we go. So now that does lead us into a statement from members of the public, and I understand there isn't any today. So we can then move on to item 6, which is the Future Mobility Strategy Report. And I'll ask Mark to introduce, please.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Mark Bellelli, and I'm technical lead for Transport for the South East. So I have overall responsibility for the delivery of our technical programme of work. Just to introduce this item, I'll be handing over in a moment to Giles Perkins from WSP, who's going to be presenting some of the key findings of the strategy to you. But just to emphasise the importance of this work and future mobility as a mechanism for helping us deliver our 2050 vision that we set out in the transport strategy. The new technologies that are emerging, members will have seen out on evidence of this out on the street with the rise of e-bikes, e-scooters, and the introduction of more and more integrated ticketing arrangements. These have a real opportunity to help us deliver on reducing congestion, decarbonising, and helping people to make seamless end-to-end journeys. So in order to develop the strategy in March 2020, we commissioned WSP to do the work to produce the document. And I'm pleased, as I said, that we've got Giles Perkins here, who's been project director for the work, who is now just going to present to you some of the key findings of the work, and also to emphasise the key role for Transport for the South East in terms of moving this important area of work forward for us. Over to Giles.
Thank you, Mark. I'll share my screen if, as ever, I can get the technology to work. Can everybody or somebody just say that they can see my screen?
Yep. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So as Mark introduce, I'm Giles Perkins, Head of Future Mobility for WSP, to talk about the Future Mobility Strategy. So the Future Mobility Strategy, as you would hope and expect, consists of an awful lot of technical work that sits behind. So ourselves with Steer, who are a subconsultant, have done a huge amount of work over the last year or so in terms of looking at this question as to how future mobility in all its guises. So basically everything that's changing from what we might know as kind of normal in transportation, and the challenges, opportunities that are around that whole subject area, and how it can help Transport for the South East reach its goals and objectives. This work builds on previous work, for those that remember the future transport technology work of 2 to 3 years ago. So this has been a long transit to get to where we are today, which is a technical report, a strategic plan, and the strategy. And it's the last two of those that will give you a quick trot through today. So the future mobility strategy, in overview, it defines the future of mobility and identifies the signals, trends and trajectories impacting on mobility in the future. And what we mean by signals, trends and trajectories is the green shoots of things that are changing, trends being the observable changes that we're starting to see. So as Mark said, e-scooters, e-cargo bikes, etc. And the trajectories are the big, the big things that are becoming stable. So for instance, the huge rise in electric vehicle car sales over the last year or so. It sets out the vision and objectives for the strategy. It identifies bundles of interventions. Now, this is really interesting. What we're doing here is we're not saying these are all different types of technologies and the solutions that are applicable to everybody everywhere. We're saying there are bundles of interventions when put together that meet the needs of people in different places across the Southeast. And this is really important. This is a people and place-led piece of work that has looked at the needs of all the different communities in the different types of communities right across the Southeast. It also identifies the complementary measures that are needed in terms of the support mechanisms that will bring this strategy to life, because nobody likes a piece of strategy work that ends up collecting dust on a shelf. And importantly, identifies the roles and responsibility for TFSE and its partners in delivering and enabling the strategy. And then the last one sets out a monitoring and evaluation framework. So is it efficable? Are we actually achieving things? How are we achieving things? What's changing? And then what tack do we need to take as we go forward? So we've got a vision, and the vision is by 2035, the southeast of England will have a globally leading sustainable mobility ecosystem, accelerating the move to net zero. The region will be at the forefront of innovation, integrating new technologies, modes and services with digital communications and energy networks. People and all the places in which they live, work, learn and play will steer our actions, ensuring the future of mobility is inclusive of and responsive to their needs and provides opportunity and choices for all. So what we're saying is this is people focused, it's place focused, and it's from those needs that we will then adopt the technologies that help us achieve our goals. So we have a number of objectives. Top of the heap, future mobility will play a central role in helping decarbonise the transport ecosystem, especially important given the department's publication of the decarbonisation strategy last week, through the provision of electromobility modes and services to help reduce dependency upon the sole occupancy private car, and importantly, irrespective of propulsion type. So the private car, even if electric, still has severance impacts, still causes accidents, still has air quality concerns with it, let alone the use of resources. So what we're saying is this isn't about saying that car is bad. It's saying that sole occupancy car, i.e. not using the private car to the best of its ability and helping to drive a net zero electric focused mobility system. But importantly, active travel will be the first choice for local journeys for those who are able, supporting better air quality and the improved well-being of communities. Importantly, zero-emission mass transit will be at the centre of the mobility ecosystem, reducing car dependency and ownership. And just for clarity, what we mean by zero-emission mass transit, that could be bus, that could be rail, it could be light rail, all those different mass transit modes working together with these future mobility modes. And then the mobility ecosystem will be optimized. So we're making best use of existing assets and the investments that have already been made in services and infrastructure. So this is future mobility building upon what's been achieved to date. It'll be integrated with the established passenger and freight logistic networks, and this is really important. The future mobility strategy covers freight and logistics as well, delivering safe, seamless journeys and making planning, using and paying for mobility much easier. Future mobility will be integrated with spatial and economic planning, and this is crucial in terms of how we deliver those outcomes that we want to do, how mobility fits with our placemaking decisions, how mobility reacts to and works alongside achieving those economic goals. And all of those together helping us target where investment's needed. The ecosystem will be people-centric and accessible to all, integrating the needs of communities and urban and rural places, and importantly, the rural places that are often forgotten about because the focus is generally on the urban. So rural has a large part to play in this strategy with policy modes, services and infrastructure, and then digital connectivity to do as we're doing now. And I do agree with the comment of earlier that sometimes this is very hard, but giving people the choice that services can come to them digitally, or they can engage with services, which reduces the need to travel, but we still have the travel choices available to us. So we've been through a long process in developing the strategy, looking at long lists of interventions informed by policy, etc., prioritizing those interventions, a large engagement piece where we've looked at how services and infrastructure meet typical personas, as we call them, typical people's needs across the Southeast in typical types of places. So looking at how the interventions can serve those needs and engaging with people through discussions that we've had in the various forum meetings, etc., to really check and challenge that what we're doing here is developing interventions that really meet the needs that are in those urban, suburban and rural communities. We've developed a process of 5 steps for how we take these interventions through to delivery. So pilot, evaluation and learning, planning, deployment and the monitoring and evaluation. And it's important to note that we've got lots of exciting things already happening in TFSE, and I'll mention a few of those shortly. Then we look at how we might deliver. So some of the delivery leads will be through partners, will require partnership interventions and co-creation and collaboration. And then we've identified the role of TFSE, yourselves, officers, etc., in terms of enabling this change. And then we've developed an action plan that sits alongside. So when we look at this landscape of future mobility interventions, it's quite busy. And just to pick a few out here, low-level air freight, so the use of drones, ride sourcing, ride sharing, hydrogen refueling. So we've obviously got hydrogen through the Go Ahead group down at Brighton and Hove at the moment, and in the corridor to Crawley, big investment in hydrogen proposed. Shared powered two-wheelers, bike share, electric bike share, mobility as a service platforms, as Kent are considering at the moment, and as being considered as part of the Solent FTZ down in Southampton and Portsmouth. Digital demand responsive transport, shared e-scooters, the list goes on and on. But it's important to remember that through the Solent Future Transport Zone, through the Kent Mobility as a Service and the EBS Fleet electric bus proposals and the work that Go Ahead have been done on hydrogen, we've got an awful lot of these things already happening. So the starting point, our baseline, is extremely healthy. When we think about places, we've thought about things in terms of these 4 broad groupings here: major economic hubs, so the big towns and cities that might be on our coasts or away from London, our urban places, so our kind of well-connected urban places, those London commuter towns, etc., those that are orbital to London and centres in their own right. then rural, some of which have good accessibility and poor accessibility, then remote rural, those that are well away from everywhere. So this is really for the first time, segmenting that place piece and then considering how those different interventions meet the needs of the different sorts of people that we've identified in those places. So the people that we've identified, we've grouped into these clusters of groups with some very interesting descriptions: village life, semi-detached suburbia, service sector workers, family terraces. And we've got kind of illustrative descriptors for these people and their sorts of behaviours. We know the broad volumes of these people. So what we're doing is we're tailoring interventions to the types of people that are illustrated here. And we've considered how emerging types of people come forward as we go through the process over the next few years. So here's a map of that social segment and distribution, and you'll notice obviously here there's an awful lot of green, and green is village life. And this is why rural being at the heart of this equation in terms of what we've been considering to balance all those very dense areas that you can see the browns on here. Brown is service sector workers. You've got preschool and family terraces, which is the orange. So some of this is quite obvious. You would expect terraces in built-up areas. You perhaps would expect more kind of traditional towns to be in the places you would normally see, Tunbridge Wells and Maidstone and places like that. But when you start to, and you'll see this when the information's published, it's a very rich landscape that we've got with different types of people. But what is writ large is that it is this mix of urban, suburban and rural that we're trying to address with the future mobility strategy. So what we've done is consider those types of people in those types of places, and then we've considered their needs. So getting to school, getting to healthcare, is it affordable? What are the frequency of transport? Is it safe and secure and value for money? So we've considered all the different types of people at their different life stages and what's important to them, and then looked at how this bundle, these baskets of new future mobility interventions could help deliver better outcomes and ultimately a better life for all the people living across the subnational area. So we've bundled these interventions, and this is quite important. Rather than just saying certain things are applicable to everybody, it's worth just pausing to look at this slide and gives an indication of the sorts of things that might be applicable. So our major economic hubs, the big centres, we've got digital as a mode, so i.e. doing what we're doing now, communicating, coming together digitally rather than travelling, car share, freight consolidation, EV charging, mobility as a service, demand responsive transport, e-bikes and e-scooters. If we perhaps contrast that with remote rural areas where it might be more about rural mobility hubs and demand responsive transport and car clubs and obviously digital, perhaps because e-scooters might be less applicable in rural areas and they might have an older population. So across these four, what we're doing is we're tailoring the types of interventions to the types of areas. So what this does is it means we can start to illustrate what we think the markets might be and how we might get the private sector interested in helping us to solve some of these perennial challenges that we've had. It's really important to think about the supporting interventions. So we've got our bundles, our interventions that we've described. And what this diagram's illustrating is that we'll be piloting interventions, and then we've got foundational elements that sit around us. So we're suggesting a monitoring and evaluation framework, a future mobility forum, which is has met a few times to date, a future propulsion strategy, which would cover hydrogen and electric across all modes, linkages to research bodies and a shared learning hub. So everybody in constituent local authorities and partners can be learning together and contributing together to push this agenda forward. We're then into our wide scale delivery. So not just those bundles in those places, but what a behavioural change strategy looks like, what a hubs strategy looks like, how we integrate with energy and communications, how we think about our first mile, last mile for getting goods and services to people or people to railway stations to give real alternatives to those very short trips, and then what public sector service digitisation looks like in terms of avoiding the need to travel. And then we're into our delivery part of the onion skin, ranging from spatial and transport integration, local electricity grid upgrades, future mobility trials, rural digital communications, etc. So what's obvious from this onion skin diagram, if you like, is that there's lots of partners, many of which are in our virtual room today, but we're probably going to need partners beyond those that are in the room. So our action plan, the strategic plan, is to do the prioritization of the strategies proposals over the next 5 years, illustrate the locations where proposals could be delivered, the roles and responsibilities for TFSE, its partners and stakeholders, the delivery interdependencies and challenges, and the potential funding opportunities and pathways for each type of intervention. So, i.e., how we can make it successful and, importantly, to make it sticky, to make it commercially viable, so that we're introducing interventions that make a real change to communities, people and business. What's the role of Transport for South East? Well, the suggestion is it's about supporting the integration of future mobility, energy and digital into policy. It's importantly about coordination with other subnational transport bodies so that work isn't repeated, so that the subnational body group can learn together and make the best of all the good work that's done across the piece, supporting best practice, engaging with partners, making the funding case, leading on engagement, etc., etc. So all the top level oil in the machine, if you like, setting the conditions and enabling this new dialogue to take place. There are obviously wider roles, and this is really important, from central government, LEP partners, professional institutions, academia, transport providers, public sector organisations. But it's importantly that we engage with landowners and developers who are investing heavily in the region so we can get better outcomes. And it's also important that we do consider non-STEM in here, humanities, arts, entertainment, third sector, fourth sector, and obviously vehicle and technology manufacturers and providers. So there's a set of wider roles and interrelationships that we're keen to exploit. So those wider roles could be involved in the 5 stages: the piloting, the evaluation, the planning, the deployment, and the monitoring and evaluation. And what we've done in the action plan is we've identified whether partners could have a lead role, a partner role, so they're working alongside, or just being a stakeholder and doing the check and challenge and input. And the strategy sets out the specific roles and, importantly, the asks of all of the partners that have been identified. Underpinning the future mobility strategy is a monitoring and evaluation framework, and this is really important. It's to look at how effective things have been. It's to look at how we can learn so that local authority X can learn from local authority Y. So, for instance, Solent and Kent both doing mobility as a service. What does that then mean for, say, Brighton? Or e-scooter trials that are happening in Kent, what does that mean for elsewhere? So really setting out how we learn things, and how we share things. And importantly, we need to be monitoring those signals, trends and trajectories so that we understand this shifting landscape, because technology is moving very, very quickly, particularly in the decarbonisation space, and particularly within the automation, the automated autonomous transport market, once that starts to develop. The intervention, monitoring and evaluation that underpins this work will help inform future strategy. It will also help share more widely in terms of with the department and how we disseminate our learnings and information more widely. So this isn't just introspective, it's outrospective, if that's a word as well, in terms of how Transport for South East can be seen as a leader, but also sharing what it learns widely. So that's the quickest of trot throughs. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to take questions.
Sorry, Giles, thank you very much. That's a really interesting introduction to this. Do we have any questions or comments for Giles? Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. Thanks very much for that presentation. Having read the documentation and heard that presentation, I can't fail to be excited by the vision and the ambition that it describes. And I commend the team that's been working on that. I think it's a really strong piece of work, and clearly there's a lot of detail and a lot of questions around delivery and all the rest of it to be gone through in due course, but it's certainly a really cracking start in my view. I've got a couple of questions. Firstly, you mentioned the role in the strategy for TFSC to be a source, a fountain of sharing best practice, and I just wonder if going beyond that, there isn't a need for thinking about TFSC's role as a fosterer of collaboration and joint funding bids and so on, not just thinking about the income streams that might come through TFSC directly, but other opportunities in funding and how TFSC may be able to help leverage some of that with partners in the region. My next question was the extent to which it's likely or intended to engage with innovation centres and innovators within the region, looking to some of our own sources of innovation. And obviously we've got a number of innovation centres across the region now, and likely there's at least one or two more on the way. So there seem to be great opportunities to tap into that resource to help move some of this forward. And then finally, maybe a slightly more difficult one is a number of the players that are coming into this space obviously are doing so on a global scale, and they can bring with them some unintended consequences, if you like, in terms of the jobs or the quality of jobs for the people employed in the delivery of the service. I think whilst it's absolutely right for TFSC to be focused on the customer, the consumer, and the wider economic impacts of a strong strategy, I don't think we could completely disregard those involved in the production and delivery of the services. And so I just foresee a time when there might need to be some value judgments made about some of the choices, so we don't end up in some of the situations we've seen certain providers in the so-called gig economy in recent years, and actually undermining our economic situation in favour of some global players' particular model. So I'm not suggesting there's an answer to that today, but I just think I'd be interested to think how we're going to start to approach that and think about what criteria we might be having to reference to make the sort of decisions that might be coming down the line.
Mark, do you want me to have a crack at those?
Yeah.
In reverse order. So the unintended consequences, I think, is a really important one. And I think when we think about how we specify things, so whether that's the procurement of services or a pilot, etc., or as colleagues are doing or have done in Solent with the tendering for the mobility as a service, and I know Kent are looking at this, I think it's really important when we're defining those tenders and the outcomes that we want to achieve from them, that we do consider those corporate social responsibility issues, the wider value piece, rather than just necessarily specifying a service. And I think it's interesting because it does play into the skills bit, that it's a different environment when perhaps engaging with let's call them technologists, for want of a better phrase, that they have a different raison d'etre than perhaps we have. And I think there's a literacy thing here in terms of us learning to speak their language and them speaking our language to make sure that we can tackle that. So I do 100% agree with you that we do need caution, but I think we've got a strong strategy here that sets out our objectives, and that's the touchstone to keep going back to. On innovation centres, we did some mapping work in the technical report to do that deep dive into what's happening. For me, that's the catalyst, that's the engine that drives this, that we need to be building on those, doing that collaboration piece, and perhaps, setting them missions and challenges to rise to what's in this, I think, is a really good opportunity. Mustn't forget, we've got a lot of evidence in here that might give some confidence to others to step into the space to do some clever things. And then on leveraging funding, yes, totally agree. We need to be leveraging funding from a variety of different sources. Importantly, we need to be creative about that. WSP, I authored a paper on this about rural recently to say perhaps we need to think differently about how we might leverage that funding, because it might be that we're using energy and communications funding to deliver transport outcomes. So we need to be creative about the way in which we approach that. But yes, I agree. Some of those are thorny challenges, and I don't have all the answers, because if I did, I might not be here. I'd probably be on the other side of the fence. But I think these are all the really thorny questions we need to start addressing.
Thank you.
Mark, did you want to comment on that before I come to Ian?
Yeah, just to follow up on Martin's point about the role of TFSE, the strategic plan does set out quite an ambitious role for TFSE in terms of what the strategy recommends we should be doing and the role that we should be playing. And just to highlight that has some resourcing implications, and we're intending to use this work as a platform for our sort of bid into the next spending round submission to try and ensure that we get the resources that we need, particularly person power, to enable us to sort of perform the ambitious role that the action plan sets out for us. And so your points about how far can we how far can we push this in terms of moving from getting others to collaborate to actually fostering that collaboration and joining people together. That's very much dependent on us getting the resources we need through a bid to DFT to enable us to take this important work area forward.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. That's helpful. Thank you.
Martin, your hand's still up. Did you want to come back, or are you all right? Okay. All right, I'll come to you, Ian, then, please.
Thank you, Keith.
Welcome.
Thank you. Cheers. Yeah, really optimistic and interesting presentation and report. Thank you. But I have to question the ambition, I suppose, about us being a globally leading sort of centre for new forms of mobility. I mean, I had the pleasure yesterday of cycling around a suburb of Milton Keynes, which I think was built about 35, 40 years ago, and has a completely independent network of cycleways and footways, independent of the road network. We've had a lot of innovation over the past decade, I suppose, from things like Amazon with home deliveries, Uber with sort of call-on-demand cabs, the advent of e-bikes, and the growth of broadband. Are we, as infrastructure providers, actually keeping up, let alone leading the way with technological trends and societal trends? I mean, I'm wearing my South Downs planning hat. I'm still seeing planning applications coming forward without provision for electric charging, without provision for bikes, without connections to bikeways. I'm seeing Highways England schemes coming forward without provision for cycleways, even though there are multi-billion motorway improvements and major trunk road improvements going in, but still no provision for cycleways. So have we actually got the mindset right in terms of the infrastructure providers, many of whom are represented on TFSE, to actually move with the times, let alone be globally leading?
If I could come back on, I mean, I think very much our approach and the approach to the transport strategy is sort of setting out, as we have, a plan and provide approach, setting out where we want to be and how we're going to get there. I think your points about, I think we're leading edge in that sense in adopting that approach, but some of the stakeholders that we work with are not quite there. And it's obviously part of our mission to try and bring people with us. And I think in setting out this ambitious strategy, that's what we've done. We've got to have something to aim for, to provide us with the guide and to marshal the resources and to provide a focus for other people and other organisations to move their own thinking forward, because there is lots of this stuff, as Giles has highlighted, which is green shoots and needs encouragement. But hopefully what we're doing is providing the framework for that growth to nurture these things, which I think differentiate us from some of the other subnational transport bodies who are maybe a little bit more infrastructure led. This provides us with a unique opportunity to embrace this area. Lots of uncertainty with it, absolutely. But if we manage our resources well, then I believe that we can get where we want to go in terms of where that 2035 vision was setting out.
Can I just add to that, Mark? I think, and as someone who is immersed in this space, at every opportunity, and this is a genuine statement, I talk around the boldness of TFSE engaging in this work and recognizing the importance of this emerging space, that it is something that overlaps transportation, it overlaps energy, it overlaps digital communications, it overlaps land use planning, it overlaps societal trends. And I think the real difference in Transport for South East is that this isn't something that's just emerged and it's something that's kind of oh, there's the shiny thing. This is a long trajectory that's been gone on over 3 years or so. It's about making best use of assets and taking a different approach as to how we deliver outcomes. It's very exciting for me because it's a subnational body saying, look at all these things that's in our toolbox, rather than let's have a bit of e-scooter here and a bit of this here and a bit of that there. It's a strategy that says this is how we can make a difference. I think that's quite a statement of intent to the department, to be saying, look, we believe this has a role. So I do tell everybody everywhere about the work that TFSE are doing on this.
Thank you. I've got 2 more hands up. If I come to Rupert Turvin, and welcome, Rupert. Sorry I didn't welcome you at the beginning.
Oh, that's fine, Keith. I'm substituting for Alan Jarrett. I think this is it's a very, very good strategy, and the key will be implementing it, as Ian Phillips has said. And I've been to Milton Keynes, and for its day, it was very, very advanced, and it feels like a different type of town. We've got a lot of old infrastructure, old towns. Just take charging the car, for example. If you've got a terraced house and you've got no off-road parking, I'm not quite sure how these sort of issues are going to be tackled. So it's the detail of how the strategy is implemented that is the key thing, and how we can scale it and keep that within people's purchasing power to make it to make it a no-brainer for them to go for. As regards planning, I do see developers still coming forward and saying, well, we're doing what we're mandated to do, what we're required to do, but they're not. That will come in 3 years' time, so we're not going to do it now. So it's not a great. We are waiting for the lead from developers, because they still seem to be being dragged along.
Just come back on that, Rupert, and it comes back to the phrase that Mark used before, green shoots. So to give you an example, Otterpool Park down near Folkestone is a development that we're working on, and there is a future mobility strategy that underpins the Otterpool Park development, because the developer wanted to move into this space. And it's really interesting that there are green shoots. It's just that it's not normal, and I think we have the opportunity to influence. Many of those, let's call it private infrastructure providers, are realizing that, to flog some homes, you're going to have electric vehicle chargers, you're going to have a car club and these sorts of things. So we're starting to see a bit of a sea change in terms of we're getting lots more of those requests and working with lots more. By no means normal, but I think using those best case examples that we've already got with TFSE as a lever when we go into discussions with other developers and say, look what's happening over in Kent, or look what's happening in Brighton, or wherever, starts to kind of raise the game a little bit. And I think that's exciting. It does come back to this piece around all of us understanding all of the great things that's happening across the region.
Thank you. Are you okay with that, Rupert? You finished?
That's great. I mean, the idea of car clubs can be a case of the developer thinking, great, if I can get a car club, I don't have to provide so many car parking spaces, so they can see a great profit for themselves in that, and sell it as a green alternative. So there will be no problem getting developers to go for that in high intensity urban areas. But it's getting that push where it's not necessarily in there, they can't see it going into their back pocket as well. That's I think a bit of a challenge.
Excellent. Daniel, you were next. Thank you for that.
Thank you, and I'll kind of follow on from that, because I think this is all about. I like the fact that the word aggregation keeps coming up in your work, Giles, and I think this is a soapbox that I get on a lot. Rob Humby will confirm this. for me, the biggest role of TFSE is in bringing things together and creating that common vision, which will de-risk it for all the participants and do exactly what Rupert you've just been saying. If two parties realise they have something complementary, then they're both going to save money or make greater profit and deliver a better service. So if that's the main intent of this strategy, then I'm 100% behind it. I think it is, and therefore I will continue to do the same. So I think being able to bring people together and express a common vision is really important. One of the pieces of work that we're doing at the moment is shaping the spending review submissions from the Centre for Connected and Autonomous Vehicles and BEIS into, as I say, for this autumn spending review. And the biggest thing that industry is clamoring for around that is government leadership, because that in itself de-risks massively. They're not even asking first and foremost for money. They're asking for leadership. If TFSE can provide that leadership, then TFSE's money will go a lot further as well.
Thank you for that. General comment. We'll pick it up if you need to later. Dan Watkins, you were next, and then Colin Kemp.
Hi there. Yeah, thank you very much, Keith, and thank you, Giles, for the presentation. Yeah, I'm super excited about all things mobility. I run a customer service business, and I suppose the way I always think about it is, you know, for a long time everyone's talked about transport, but actually as a consumer, what you're really interested in is mobility, right? So transport is the feature, mobility is the actual benefit. And I love this because it sort of is the fusion of all these new forms of technology, which are, you know, taking over every sphere of our everyday lives, coming together and trying to just give a mobility offering to the consumer. And I'm absolutely sure that this is what's going to happen to our part of the world and every part of the world over the next 10-20 years. Thinking about it a bit more pragmatically, though, and in terms of liaising back with my local authority, do you see the kind of output of all this work ultimately being like setting up a bit of a framework, and then, you know, so in my case, Kent, we come to you, and so we say we're thinking of doing, you know, something to do with mobility in Canterbury or Faversham or Dartford. How could we use what you've done, or do you actually see it more a bit the other way, that you're going to come to us and say, we think you should be doing this in your villages and towns, etc.?
I think it's a bit of both. And I think the examples that we've already got out there, so take, for instance, decarbonisation of the Ebbsfleet bus fleet, or mobility as a service in Kent, or the whole of the future transport zone piece in Solent. It's not about command and control. It's about the sharing piece. So innovations, pilots, specific point interventions, new ways of doing things can and should come up from local authorities, but feeding it upwards into the TFSE family to then push back down to everybody else, so that we're not wasting money repeating doing things. So one place does DDRT really well, pick it up, take the learnings, allow somebody else to accelerate. So I think it's that kind of, there's a trapezium or some shaped diagram that's the collaboration piece in this. It isn't about being restrictive, it's about accelerating. And back to the word that Daniel, and thank you, Daniel, for picking up on it, it's about the aggregation piece. It's the 2 + 2 = 17. At the moment, we're barely getting 2 + 2 equaling 3.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Colin.
Yeah, I agree with all the comments that are made, and I wanted to come back on the conversation around developers and how we progress this. And I think politically we have a role to play in this, having spoken to many developers over the last couple of years on this subject, and also spoken to different boroughs and districts, my own included, is we must get in a different place politically from looking at planning applications. We're all tied into parking standards against planning applications, and then we ask for charging points and everything else on top of that, where actually we must get more in the place where we don't need to meet the parking standards, because this is a town centre, city centre, village centre location, but actually we can take away some of the parking standards and replace them with charging, whatever else it is. So I think politically, we definitely have a role to play in this, and I think we have a role to play as TFSE in changing some of the political direction about where we're going on planning, and that way we will give the developers confidence to come forward with changing it, because they know they haven't got to meet both standards.
And I thank you for raising that, Colin. And I think the key thing here is it's about providing the evidence and the certainty to all parties that these things can succeed. So, you know, not just coming up with a very wishy-washy, here's a bunch of technology stuff that can do great things. It's here's the potential audiences for it. This is why it's important to them. This is the change it can make in your community. So it's getting to that business case, that commercial case that underpins it, to give people the confidence to make what some might see as brave decisions, others might see as logical decisions, but it has to be evidence-based. And I think that's what we've tried to do with this work, is move into that evidence space rather than the slightly fluffy, dare I say, technologist space that it's been to date.
That's really helpful, and I think a good way to end on this. Giles, can I thank you for all of your presentation and the hard work that's gone into this. I'm sure it's got a long way to go. We've got a big opportunity here, and I hope that we can all, as you've said, make the best of it, because it is something that we can all join in on. So hopefully we'll find that useful as we go forward. Mark, is there anything else you want to end with, or are you happy? Mark's disappeared. Okay, well, thank you, Mark. I hope it's not me that's frozen and it's Mark, is it?
No, just to quickly thank Giles, like yourself, for all his hard work from the team in putting the strategy together, and now our job to try and drive it forward.
Absolutely.
Thank you all for listening.
And the enthusiasm is clear for all, Giles. So well done. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. So we are asked to agree the future mobility strategy. So do we have any more comments or questions on the agenda that or the recommendation before us? No, we consider that agreed. Thank you. Yes. So we'll move on to agenda item 7, which is the lead officer's report. And Rupert, would you like to introduce, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I will keep this brief. I just want to draw your attention, and Councillor Glazier mentioned this at the top of the meeting, just to the changes of membership that are set out in 1.2 within the paper. I would also add, in addition to the content of the paper, that since drafting the report, the Transport Decarbonisation Plan has subsequently been published, all 122 pages of it. And I think, that's a positive step. Particularly given we're moving into COP26 later on this year, it does start to put a bit more policy framework around the direction that we need to go in. And then the final point, Chairman, I'd just like to make again, you did mention this at the top of the meeting, is just to thank Russell Spink and Rob Dickin for their work with Transport for the South East over the last couple of years. We're a small team, and Russell and Rob have made an amazing contribution in the time that they've been with us, and I'm extremely grateful to both of them. Other than that, Chairman, I'm very happy to take any questions on the content of the report.
Thank you. Are there any comments? And whilst you think, I think on behalf of the whole board, we'd agree with you. Russell and Rob have been a real asset, and wish them well in the future wherever they go and whatever they get up to. So again, thank you from me and from the board. Rob.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I raised the point last time under the sort of the work of the South East, what we're doing, or the work the officers have done. And it was about the ARUP report. Now, I understand that, and I wasn't at a previous meeting. I just sort of wanted to make the point that this is all about partnership working and working together. And in fact, that applies to the last report as well, in terms of this will only work if we all do it in a joined up way. And I think it's just remembering, I think, through you, Chair, I suppose to Rupert, really, in terms of all the different authorities have their own different constitutions and policies and things we have to go through, as all the other stakeholders. And it's just making sure that we have sufficient time to go through those procedures and processes in our own individual sort of organisations, if you like. So I understand we need to move at pace as well, but it's just giving us that opportunity to make sure that we do have that time to consider reports fully, so that, because sometimes we have to take it either back to full council or cabinet or whatever, and even with other organisations to their boards. So it's just a bit of a request, really, just to make sure that we are all given sufficient time to be able to do that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Rob. I'm sure Rupert's listening. Do you want to respond, Rupert?
Yeah, absolutely, Councillor Humby. Thank you. I mean, it's a good reminder, and absolutely we will make sure. And we recognise that each authority has different constitutional arrangements. You know, whether it needs to go through cabinet, committee, or full council. It is challenging. There's no question, but we want to make sure that you are given adequate time to take it through your own internal processes. Sometimes we have a few more hiccups than we'd like, but absolutely recognise the point that you make, and we'll ensure we do so.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, it also helps the sort of the future role, if we're looking at that, of Transport for South East in terms of its role in coordinating. And if we're able to do that, we can make sure that we are joined up. And you know, there's a big role for Transport for South East there in bringing all the partners together. But it's just that appreciation that sometimes we're not able to react. You know, we have different timescales we have to work to sometimes. Thanks, River.
Thank you. I think that point's well made. If there are no others, again, we're asked to note the activities of Transport for the South East between January and July. So we're happy to do that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So we move on to agenda item 8, which is the finance update. And Rachel, you're going to introduce, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll just very quickly provide an overview of the information that's included in the paper. There's a number of things that we're asking board members to consider as part of this report. The first item is the end of year budget report. Because we didn't have a board meeting in April, this is coming to you slightly later than it normally would. But what we have included as Appendix 1 is the final budget position for financial year 2020-2021. In terms of what the report sets out, it shows that total expenditure was 1.15 million, but an additional £900,000 is committed funding, which is to be carried forward into what is now the current financial year for technical work such as area studies. So that's basically because we've commissioned something in the last financial year, but the work programme continues into this current financial year, so we had to ring fence that money for carry forward. In terms of our end of year position, it was very much largely as forecast, and there's just a couple of points to flag within that. In terms of our operational costs for last year, they were lower than expected, and the reason that they were lower than expected is because we did have considerable cost savings to our events and room hire costs as an impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we have had some carry forward for our operational expenses as well. In terms of our technical programme, it was very much as expected. As I've already flagged, there's some technical work which carried forward into this financial year, and that money has been ring fenced and carried forward for the current year's financial budget. Also, just to flag on the previous year's financials, East Sussex County Council, as our accountable body, will provide Section 151 sign-off for the final accounts of East Sussex later this summer, and that will include the TFSA accounts. In terms of the current year budget proposal, this is set out in Appendix 2, and I'm very pleased to say that we were successful in securing a further grant from the DFT of 1.225 million, which is incredibly welcome, and it does enable us to proceed with our technical programme and work towards our strategic investment plan. That sits alongside the money that we have been awarded by our constituent authorities, which was agreed at a previous board meeting, and that is used to fund our core secretariat. As a result of all of that grant funding, we have put together the budget that's set out in Appendix 2, and it gives us an operating budget of 3.223 million. That includes the ring fence carry forward from the previous financial year for the technical programme and our reserves. The main elements of the expenditure which are set out in the budget relate to the technical programme, very much working towards our strategic investment plan now, so it does allow us to conclude all 5 area studies, as well as the freight logistics and international gateways study and the future mobility strategy, which you've just seen there. The rest of the budget is made up of our staffing costs, communications and engagements activity, and our operational costs. And all of that is about working towards supporting the technical programme and delivery of the strategic investment plan. Again, because of the timing of this board meeting and the fact that we didn't meet in April, we have commenced work against the technical programme for 21-22, and Appendix 3 sets out the budget position at the end of June 21. In terms of the final part of the report, we have included a fully designed version of the annual report and business plan for board sign-off. Both of those documents are intended to be digital documents, and following board approval will be made available on our website. The annual report is attached as Appendix 4, and that sets out clarity around our structure, role, vision and purpose, as well as a summary of our achievements in the last financial year. And the business plan sets out our intended work programme for the next 12 months. We have attached those documents, and thank you to Russell for pulling those together, because that's something that Russell has led on before he departs for pastures new. So in terms of the recommendations, the board are asked to agree the end of year budget report for 2020-2021, agree the budget proposal for this current financial year, note the current financial position to the end of June 2021, and agree the final annual report and business plan for the current financial year. Happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rachel. Are there any questions for Rachel? No hands showing. So are we happy to agree the 4 recommendations as just been outlined by Rachel?
Yeah, agree.
Okay. Thank you very much. And thank you, Russell, for putting that together as well. We come on to agenda item 9, which is the area studies. And Sarah, you're going to introduce, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Councillor Glazier. Afternoon, everybody. The purpose of this report is just to provide members of the board with an update on the progress of the area study work. Appendices 1 and 2 set it out in a sort of chart format. It's probably easier to read. Just some highlights. Following the grant notification back in April of this year from DFT, we've been able to start the last 2 of the area studies. So we currently have all 5 studies underway. The Southeast Radial, Southwest Radial, those last 2 have progressed much more quickly than the other 2 studies. A lot of the evidence base had already been gathered, and they're obviously learning lessons from the studies that have gone before them. So they're already at the point where they're looking to agree the problems and objectives and aims for the studies that need to be tackled. The inner orbital and the south central radial area studies are starting to assess long lists of potential interventions using a multi-criteria assessment framework. So following shortly behind the outer orbital, which is the most advanced, which has started to go with short lists of interventions, which are now being tested through the CELA model that was developed for the transport strategy. I think just a couple of things to draw out from the work and make members aware of, that these long lists of interventions are drawn from a variety of sources. So it's not just a sort of bottom-up approach of schemes that have been hanging around for a long time. It's very much a top-down approach from the aims and objectives of the transport strategy and of the study. And we're using sort of wider thinking from the project team, our consultant project team, and always various subject matter experts as well. These schemes are then being assessed against the objectives that are agreed for the study. So yeah, we're in charge of our own destiny in terms of what we're measuring them against, but those aims and objectives are agreed by stakeholders before then the sifting is carried out. And I think the CELA modelling very much is underway. It's getting some really good, interesting early results, but we are refining it as we go to make sure it is behaving in the way that we're expecting it to do so. As I said, the initial results are very, very positive. Bus-based interventions seem to be performing particularly well, which is good news about, as we start to look to the future. But also I think it's worth highlighting at this stage that the interventions that are coming forward in these packages are not likely to be any particular solution. They're much more outcome based. So just a couple of examples, we would maybe be saying that an area needed a mass transit system that provided a bus every 15 minutes with an average journey time speed of around 15 miles an hour. We wouldn't necessarily be saying that there should be specific bus lanes on this road between points X and Y. That would be something that would come along later on as the scheme was developed. So I think just that sort of looking at what we will be coming out through the study saying it's long-term solutions and what those types of solutions should be rather than specific schemes in specific places. The timescale for the outer orbital study itself has been extended a little bit to accommodate some refinement to the Sealand modelling, but this has had no overall impact on the overall programme of studies, and the lessons learned will obviously be fed into the subsequent studies to help those progress more smoothly. In terms of stakeholder engagement, we've tried to take a much more streamlined approach. Originally, we had monthly meetings for every study with stakeholder groups from our constituent authorities, and we very quickly realised that that was far too much of a draw on officers' time, and we needed to revisit how we did that. So we've now reprogrammed those meetings so they are targeted meetings at key points in the programme where we need specific input or feedback from our constituent authorities, and that's hopefully proven to be a better use of constituent authority officers' time. We also have a forum set up for each of the area studies, and so far we've held 2 forum meetings for each of the outer orbital, inner orbital and south coast radial studies, and 1 each for the southeast radial and southwest radial. The second for those 2 are coming up in the next couple of weeks. Again, had some really good engagement and challenge and input from our wider stakeholders, which is really helping shape the studies. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Questions, comments? Again, I think you can see what having the funding from DFT has done for us now has enabled us to plan much better and able to get on with some of this, which is really good. So if there are no questions or comments, I thank you, Sarah and the team. We will note the progress as printed. Thank you. So we come on to agenda item 10, which is the working towards a strategic investment plan. And Rachel, I think you're going to take us through it, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This paper very much builds on the update that Sarah's just given on the area studies, and as board members are aware, we are starting to work towards our strategic investment plan. The purpose of this paper is to provide an update on the proposed approach to developing the SIP. And as has previously been discussed, the strategic investment plan is intended to be the blueprint for investment for the South East for the next 30 years, taking us up to 2050. And it is a really important document in terms of how we will be engaging with the Department for Transport, the Treasury going forward, but also it's a document that needs to have wide appeal and be accessible to our residents, communities and businesses as well, so that they understand what we're looking to do. As outlined in the paper and as by Sarah, the SIP will identify the packages of interventions that are needed to deliver the transport strategy. And in terms of the outcomes that we are hoping to achieve from the strategic investment plan, we are hoping that the government will and its delivery partners will give due regard to the investment decisions. That the government and its delivery partners will give due regard to the SIP when making its investment decisions, and that we are hoping that the transport strategy, the SIP and the associated evidence base will be adopted as regional strategic transport policy. The SIP has a number of component parts which are outlined in the paper, and just to highlight the importance of some of these areas, first of all, we need that strong, compelling narrative. We need to make the case for investment in the South East, and we need to demonstrate to government that they get a strong return for investing in the South East. So it needs to make a very strong case for why we are looking to proceed with these packages of interventions. It will include the technical core, which builds on the work that Sarah's just outlined. And it does include a 12-week public consultation as part of the strategic investment plan development. The other part which does feed into this report is the paper which was referenced in Rupert's report, which is about the roles, responsibilities for TFSE and its governance structures. It's really important that when we're developing the SIP that we're clear on what we are looking for TFSE to do as an organisation moving forward and the structures that we will need to achieve that. The timescales for the strategic investment plan, we are looking to bring in a provider later on this year, probably September, October time, to appoint a provider for the development of the strategic investment plan. The intention is that we will have a document, the first draft document, ready to present to the board in June next year, so June 2022. We would then start the public consultation on that document, which would run for 12 weeks. The final draft SIP would be brought to the board in November 22, and we would then give board members and constituent authorities and other board members who are represented on the board the opportunity to take it through their own governance procedures for sign-off, including Cabinet's full council as required. And that's been built into the timescales that we've drafted. The intention is that we would then return to the board with a final version of the strategic investment plan for submission to government by March 2023. So there's some quite lengthy timescales there, but it does build in a considerable amount of time for consultation, and it does allow us to take it through the sign-off procedures of our constituent authorities and board members. The paper also sets out the proposed budget for the SIP, and the DFT grant made provision for this. The DFT grant included a line for £160,000. We have included that in the board paper, and obviously that is the approval that we're seeking for this budget. Although, as per the previous ways of working of Transport for the South East, we would always seek best value for money, and if possible, we would look to ensure that that budget was lower. In terms of the procurement processes, we are intending to run this through East Sussex procurement processes, and due to the amounts involved, it would fall within a request for quotation. We are looking to go out for request for quotation around about September time, and we would be looking for SOG involvement in that process. And I'm pleased to say that we have had some volunteers from Senior Officer Group to be involved in that. What we are seeking with the procurement process is delegated authority to the lead officer in consultation with the chair for the procurement exercise and the decision-making process. We would then look to report back to the board meeting in October with an update on how that procurement process has worked. The recommendations in the report that the board are asked to agree are that we note the proposed approach to developing the strategic investment plan, agree the expected outcomes from the strategic investment plan, agree to delegate authority to the lead officer in consultation with the chair for the procurement of the strategic investment plan, and note that funding for the development of the strategic investment plan was awarded in the grant from the Department for Transport in this financial year. Happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rachel. Are there any questions or comments? Again, an enormous step forward in the development of what we're all here for. Ian.
Thank you, Keith. Yes, I mean, this is obviously a really important step forward in terms of moving on the investment side. Really looking for assurances that this will make a significant reference to rural transport issues. And also, in the terms of reference, there will be some attention paid to the Section 62 duty to have regard to protected landscapes, for that to be taken on board, because that will not only affect South Downs, but obviously all the other protected landscapes in the South East, and is something that I would hope would play a significant role in terms of the terms of reference from any winning tenderers.
I would get an officer assurance, but I can assure you that that's the whole purpose of having your involvement very early on and working with South Downs and other protected landscapes rather than just blundering on, as others may have done before us.
Welcome your assurance, Keith.
Rachel, do you want to answer?
Absolutely, yes. As per all of our previous technical work, we will be engaging with board members to ensure that cross-cutting issues such as rural decarbonisation and protected landscapes are represented in the development of the SIP.
Colin.
Yeah, I think the important part in this, and it's mentioned in here, is the compelling narrative. And I think getting that right, making sure it's not too long, but making sure it includes the different elements, I think is going to be really important. And it's really something that needs, I mean, I'm not a full-time board member, but making sure that goes around the relevant partners and different groups and different local authorities to make sure we get that absolutely spot on, because it doesn't matter all the technical bits. That narrative is what will be read and what will need to really sing the praises of what this is trying to achieve.
I think that's a very good point, Colin. And Rachel.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Kemp. It is something which needs to be it needs to be a very hard-hitting, short, compelling narrative, and we're working on the request for quotation document at the minute. And one of the things that we have built into it is that it's an iterative process to develop that narrative involving board members and senior officer group members as appropriate, so that there's a number of iterations that come around for comment. We absolutely need to get that right. That's what ministers will read, not all the technical details. So yeah, we are already building that in.
And you will get a different narrative from political people and officers, even from the same authority, because they will have different aims and outcomes. So we must make sure we get that balance right.
I think you're absolutely right. I think even political colleagues might have different views, Colin, but who knows? I think that we have the opportunity, but I think the key point there is exactly as you and Rachel said. You know, the time taken to get the narrative right is worth, and I'm confident that we've built that timescale into the programme. So hopefully we can end up with a really good report. No other questions or comments? So I take it from that we agree the 4 recommendations that Rachel read out, rather than listening to me give them again. There you go, in front of you now. Thank you. No one against, so we go with that. Thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 11, which is the technical programme update. And Mark, are you going to introduce this?
Yes, Chair, thank you very much. Just briefly, this paper covers 2 areas of our technical programme: the development of the freight logistics and gateway strategy, and progress on the rollout of our Project View data mapping tool. So just quickly on the freight strategy, as you can see from the paper, work is underway on this at the moment. The paper sets out the various work packages that are being pursued to develop a comprehensive freight strategy and improve our understanding of this area of the transport system, and hopefully drive forward improvements in the efficiency with which it works. Decarbonisation challenge, an absolute key component of that. Just for members' information, we will be bringing a copy of the draft strategy to the October meeting, where we'll be seeking comment and an endorsement of the fully formed strategy. So members will hear more about that at the October meeting. Just quickly on the Project View tool, this is a data mapping tool that we had developed as part of the development of the transport strategy. So it formed a place for us to store all of our data, the data and the evidence that we collected to develop the transport strategy, but also the ability to map that. So work has been going on in developing that, and we launched the Project View tool to our sort of wider group of stakeholders at our October board meeting, and in April and May of this year we've been running some workshops and training sessions to train up constituent authority officers and borough and district officers on how to use the tool, because we believe it has tremendous value potentially to constituent authorities and boroughs and districts and other stakeholders in being able to visualise some of the data that we've collected and other data, national data sets that the tool contains. So it has 300 data sets in it. It's been very well received, a lot of enthusiasm, and when people see it, they're very impressed with what it does. And we've got further workshop activity and user groups programmed to help us get feedback from those people who are using it to help to develop it further. Some of the sample outputs of what you actually get from the tool are just shown in Appendix 1 to the paper. There are some screenshots there that just give you a flavour of what it's able to do. And what we're currently doing is continuing with the rollout, looking to include more data sets in the tool as they become available from the freight strategy and the future mobility strategy. And also looking to refresh some of the data that's in there. So we're currently in a rollout stage. Like I said, it's going very well. Just like to commend Ben White, who's a team member who's been working really hard on this and has been fronting up our work on this. So very good job that he's done. And yes, happy to take any questions on either the progress on the freight strategy or on the rollout of the Project View tool.
For me. You're on mute.
You're muted, Keith.
Oh, I thought I cut. Sorry. I was saying, while you think of questions, although Colin's there, I've had the pleasure of seeing this working on 4 occasions now where we've done presentations to our borough and district colleagues. And those of you who are going to be at the Kent meeting tomorrow will have the pleasure of seeing it there. It is a very useful tool, and I think as we've all said that have seen it, keeping the data up to date is going to be the big test, but if we can do that, it'll be a very helpful tool for all of us. And perhaps if board members haven't seen it, we may need to direct them to it and give them some introduction to it at some stage. Colin.
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of the same there, Keith, that I had the pleasure of seeing it at the Surrey Transport Forum. I think the programme itself looks really interesting and looks great about the way you can separate some of the data, and anyone's got an opportunity to look at it. Mark used the language again about training officers in accessing this. I think we need some member involvement from lead officers at borough and county levels to be able to access this as well, because I think this could be a really useful tool for us to start to build some dialogue and some conversations together. So welcome this programme wholeheartedly, and look forward to getting some briefing and having a bit of a play and looking what it can do, because I think even the quick demonstration we had didn't really scratch the surface of what's in the programme, so it looked really interesting.
Good, thank you. No other questions or comments? Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. Just very briefly, and forgive me being a little bit sector specific, but Mark, obviously the data available in the Project View tool, looks incredibly helpful for a whole range of things. I'm just wondering whether, given the pressures on local authority transport teams and highways teams developing their bus service improvement plans at a rate of knots over the next couple of months, and the importance of really good data within that, are people engaging with you or others about using the tool to perhaps access some of the background data they could make good use of within that context? And I guess a follow-up question would be, who do we talk to get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty detail about it? Is it Ben or is it someone else?
You're muted, Mark.
Yes, it's Ben. Who you need to Ben White, who's leading on the development of the work and the tool. Yes, on the issue of further data, the use of the tool. Obviously, like I said, there are lots of data sets in there. It does include some information about that's going to be useful to the constituent authorities in developing their bus service improvement plans, rich data sets on travel to work areas and various. So in rolling it out, I can't say that we specifically targeted those who are developing bus service improvement plans, but very much we're in that rollout stage of trying to sort of launch it into our constituent authorities. And then what we're seeing is happen, other people are showing interest and coming forward and saying, can I have a log on to get involved? So it does seem to be working in getting to those people who need to see it to help them in their day-to-day work.
Good. And I'm sure you heard what Colin said about councillors. I mean, I think it's been made at most of the presentations that we've had, so that's good. Martin, did you want to come back, or was that? Okay, thank you. Can see no other hands, so are we happy to accept the recommendations that Mark read out, which are in front of you now?
Yep.
Agreed. Thank you very much. So we move on to agenda item 12, which is the MRN LLM schemes. And Sarah, give us an update, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. So the purpose of this report is just to provide an update on the major road network and large local major schemes within the TFSE area. And I'm sure members will recall we prioritised schemes which were then submitted to the Department for Transport back in 2019. And since then, our constituent authorities have been progressing their scheme development work and working with the Department for Transport on their business cases. The main news for this particular update is to update members with two announcements that have been made since the last meeting. And in particular, this is the first time that ministers have agreed to provide actual funding towards schemes in the TFSE area. We've had schemes that have been approved to move from one stage of development to the next, but this is the first time we've had actual funding allocations with the schemes. So on the 1st of February 2021, the Redbridge Causeway MRN scheme was granted programme entry, and ministers agreed to provide Hampshire County Council with £13.4 million towards the total estimated scheme cost of 15.8 million. That particular scheme, because it has such a high benefit cost ratio, is taking part in the Department for Transport's pioneering fast track for full approval process. So assuming there are no material changes to the information that's in the outline business case, which has been approved, once the Hampshire County Council go through their full procurement process and they get an actual tender scheme cost, then that can follow a very fast track approval for the final sort of rubber stamping from DfT. Also on the 7th of June this year, the A284 Limpster Bypass MRN scheme was also granted programme entry, and ministers then agreed to provide West Sussex County Council with £11.792 million towards, sorry, my notes are refusing to scroll. Where am I? Towards a scheme with an estimated total cost of 21.634 million. In this case, the remaining funding is coming from a combination of West Sussex County Council, Coaster Capital, LEP, and also private developers. That particular scheme is now progressing with its various statutory processes, following which it will be able to apply for full approval through the normal route. I think the sort of takeaway from this is that in that last 6 months, we've therefore got a total of £25.192 million of investment for the South East area. And I think that really shows the power and the benefit of TFSE coming together and speaking with one voice on the transport priorities for our area. I think it should also encourage the various other scheme promoters to carry on with their business case development and their scheme development work, and to continue to work with DfT to get approval for their schemes as well. And on that, I'd just like to say that, you know, TFSE, we have a very good relationship with the team in DfT that are dealing with these schemes, and we're quite happy to assist any of our constituent authorities if they would like us to. The status of all of the schemes in the programme is shown in appendices 1 and 2. I do just need to highlight that on the link that was circulated with the meeting invite, there is an error in appendix, the Major Road Network appendix. It's correct in the version that's on our website. So depending on which version you're looking at, it may or may not be correct. But the A259 Bognor Regis and Littlehampton scheme is actually already at SOBC stage. They submitted their strategic outline business case to DfT last December, and they are continuing ongoing liaison with DfT on that. And we'll make sure a correct version of that appendices is circulated with the minutes.
Thank you, Sarah. Jeff.
Yeah, it's an observation rather than anything else. That's all lovely. Thank you very much. We had a case at the last Transport Forum meeting of beware of unintended consequences, and Rupert will recognise this. Quite rightly, we're keeping everybody up to date with what we're doing on all these road schemes. And just at the moment, it seems that there's more information about road schemes on the TFSE website than there is about public transport schemes. And we got accused quite roundly of having a bias towards roads. Now, Rupert put the person who raised that put it in perspective, but it's just a point. If you got one area that, because money's been made available, can progress faster, trying to make sure that anything that goes on the website is balanced. Otherwise, people will come to the wrong conclusion and make life difficult. That's all.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm sure we'll get a thought on that in a moment. Rob, do you want to come next, please?
Yeah, well, just to say, obviously extremely pleased in terms of the funding for the Redbridge flyover and the way it's done. And I thought Sarah presented that well also in saying about it being, you know, one voice and being joined up, which, as you know, Keith, is something we've been saying for a long time, and actually demonstrating that sort of coordinating role that Transport for South East can have, like I was saying earlier. So clearly extremely pleased, and shows the process does work, doesn't it? Really good.
Thank you. Sarah, I mean, I'm not sure how we don't put all of our good news right on the front page, but if we don't have so much balanced good news, I don't know how we can keep it off. But I'm sure you've got an answer for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously difficult, isn't it? But yeah, the MRN was a specific ask of government to the STBs, and we responded as we should. You know, obviously in the wider area study work, we are looking much more multimodally and trying to make the case for not having siloed pots of funding, but to look more widely across transport networks. And you know,
yes, totally agreed, Sarah. But I just thought it was a bit of feedback. That was all.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff.
Rupert, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Jeff, for bringing that up. And it's an important point for us to note because just by virtue of as we've just said over the last few minutes, the way funding streams are coming out, it just so happens that the funding streams that have come out were in response to something we did a couple of years ago. That doesn't mean that, you know, we don't have a view on rail or bus or indeed active travel. And we push professionally with the department as often as we can the importance of integrated solutions to transport. And, you know, there is a challenge, actually. The way in which the government divides up funding streams is very much with mode. And, you know, my argument is actually it needs to genuinely be integrated. So you have an integrated transport strategy rather than focus on these specific modes. And I can understand, you know, in this world where we do want to enable people, give people better choices so they don't have to use their cars, and the decarbonisation agenda, that these are criticisms that could be levelled at us. And my response is we are multimodal, we are integrated, we are plugging hard to integrate funding streams, and ultimately our strategy is about reducing car use and providing alternatives. And we know that to do that effectively, this is where the SIP is going to be so important for us, you know, we are likely to need to double bus capacity and rail capacity to enable people to make those kinds of choices.
Thank you, Rupert. Daniel.
It's just a quick question as a newbie. How confident are you that we can create that shift in perception of what TFSE does, and also create the shift in the reality of what TFSE does?
Do you want a view from me or the director? From me, I mean, I just
question to anybody that wants to answer.
Okay. Well, I believe that if we believe in the transport strategy that we put together, we've got to believe in it, and it will take time to make changes. And actually, it will take government to make decisions that will incentivise or decentivise the modes of transport that we currently have. And we all know whether that's road charging or whatever, we're going to have to get people off of out of their motor cars onto public transport. Is it going to happen overnight? No, it's not. Is it something that we can work towards? Yes, I believe we can. Rupert.
Spot on. I think, you know, there's no question, Daniel, that the next 30 years is going to be extremely challenging, you know, particularly in relation to decarbonisation. We know that, you know, our road network has existed for, you know, 100 plus, well, 500 odd years. It's a really important way in which people get about, and that will always be the case. It may be that personal mobility changes and evolves with technology, but the network that it currently provides, you know, is crucial for bus operators. It's crucial, particularly for people in rural areas, because ordinarily it is the only route in or out. So whether we like it or not, investment in those corridors is still going to be required. It's just that the technology may well change and how we move along those corridors may well be different.
Absolutely, we need to be pragmatic and practical and start from now. But I'm hoping that the vision that we portray is one that helps everyone to kind of coordinate their activities. Great. Absolutely. No, thank you. Good answers.
Dan, you want to comment?
Thanks, Keith. Actually, similar comment to Daniel. I mean, and it is important. If our modus operandi as TFSE is to basically promote green infrastructure, green transport schemes, but the funding is skewed always so heavily to roads, it does make you sort of scratch your head a little bit, because I mean, just taking some very headline numbers, and I know that this isn't exactly like for like on the years they cover, but I think the road investment strategy we've got at the moment is something like 20-25 billion pounds across the UK, and buses get 3 billion, and I think cycling is getting 2 billion pounds. Not quite like for like, but you see the point I'm making here. That the greener bit here is getting a very, very small part of the pie. I understand that some of the roads money ends up building a new road which a rapid transit bus could take, for instance, right? So that helps in greening, but a lot of it will ultimately support private vehicle use. Just curious, as I'm new into the group, do you expect these pots of money to be sort of reducing the road bit over time, pragmatically, as Daniel said, but to reduce that and more to come into rail, bus, and all that future mobility stuff we just saw?
Well, I'll ask Rupert to come in, but take my view on it, the conversations that I've had. First and foremost, I think we need to, I know it's a normal term now about greening, but actually this is not about greening. This is actually about using environmentally friendly different modes of operation or other. So I actually think that some of the environmental stuff is as important around greening. So that's a personal view on that. We in our strategy have been very clear that actually we have recommended to DfT that they should get away from road funding, from rail funding, from bus funding, and have if you like, an overall transport funding pot for the whole of the southeast. And by that way, you can then skew the amount of money that needs to be spent wherever to enable better use of the public transport. Because all the time you don't have a joined up system whereby you can go out of your door, do the first mile, the last mile, and get from A to B without all of the obstructions that currently exist. We are banging our head against the wall. But also, let's be clear about the information that we currently have is if we don't do something, the current road blockages that exist now will be 2, 3, 4 times as long, and actually nobody will be moving anywhere. So this isn't a nice to do. This is a got to do if we really want to keep the southeast growing. So how optimistic am I? I think we've got a long way to go. But actually, I think that the publishing of the strategy that we put together and these recommendations to government need to be heard. And if we keep saying them, and keep saying them, this is about the economic stability of the southeast and the country. Because let's face it, without the money from the southeast, the rest of the country haven't got any to spend anyway. Because outside of London, we are the biggest contributor. So I think we've got an absolute perfect platform to keep making the cases we have. We have the evidence behind us now. I think it's actually the commitment, and I think the more of us that can get behind that and say, look, there is an alternative here. This is not anti-cycle or pro-cyclist, pro-walking, anti-roads, and this is about the southeast progressing forward. And with that, I'll get off my soapbox because I tend to get a bit like that, and hand over to Rupert, who'll get on his.
I think, Keith, you said it brilliantly, actually. I think that there are undoubtedly some economic challenges. So if you look at frankly, simply, if you look at the price per kilometre of road construction versus the price per kilometre of rail construction, road is generally cheaper. So that begs the question: how do we appraise transport schemes? How does Treasury appraise it? And in part of that, how do you evaluate things like carbon as part of your appraisal process? Really complicated. Don't have the answers to it, but I think that's the sort of direction that I hope the decarbonisation strategy or plan that the DfT have produced springboards us into it. I think the points that are really well made about collaboration, Councillor Humby and Glazier have made this too. This is the decarbonisation challenge alone. If you start to look at transport decarbonisation, if we follow the existing trajectory, I don't know, we're into 2090. So the rate of pace that we need to move on, even to hit to 2050, gives you quite a steep gradient down. So the transport decarbonisation plan is timely. Why is that so relevant when we're talking about mobility and investment in modes and all the rest of it? It's going to be the driving factor, I think. Transport overall hasn't really decarbonised by comparison to other sectors, energy, for example. I think Ian Phillips's point about natural capital, biodiversity net gain, if you remember in your strategy, the Venn diagram, I know it's sort of old, but that economic, social and environmental, and us hitting the sweet spot is the way in which we give places the best opportunity to grow. And as a board, you have said, you don't want growth at any cost. It has to recognise the unique characteristics of the southeast. And in doing so, there are these corridors that exist. Our area studies are broadly agnostic, so they talk about corridors rather than modes. And then as we bring that into the strategic investment plan, it all comes together in an integrated transport plan for the Southeast. So, it's not going to be an easy job. There's no question about it. But I know as a board and as officers across the constituent authorities, that everybody's committed to getting to this position where we really, really value place and allow communities to thrive.
And I'm back off my soapbox now, but the reality is it's going to be a damn hard task, Dan. But we can make it happen if we really want to, I believe. So we'll keep plugging on, hopefully together.
I enjoyed your evangelicizing there, Keith, and like you, I am an optimist, and I see it in my own authority that a lot of our own transport planners are really signed up to everything everyone's just said. So yeah, let's hope the money does sort of move in that direction as well over time, and it's positive to hear that you make those representations to government upwards, as well as, of course, primarily focusing on our own region. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ian.
Thank you. Yeah, and thanks for the reference to me, Rupert, regarding biodiversity and so on. I think just a minor point, but an important one. As a transport body, we are sort of concerned with corridors, and corridors are really important these days because they are ways in which we are connecting to build a network. The networks have always been understood in terms of transportation ability, but networks are increasingly being seen as important in government circles as part of a nature recovery network and green infrastructure network and so on. And we are in a position to do a lot of coordination, a lot of good work in terms of influencing and enabling through the TFSE tentacles, for want of a better word, in furthering that approach, which moves away from traditional transport and begins to build on the transport infrastructure as a means of achieving other desirable deliverables.
Thank you, Ian. No other hands up. We're asked to note the engagement. Oh no, sorry, it's the next one. We are asked to note that the two TFSE MRM schemes have been granted programme entry and received confirmation from DFT. So I'm sure we're happy to do that. Thank you. If we come on to Lucy, please, to introduce the comms and stakeholder engagement update.
Thank you very much, Councillor Glazier. I won't dwell on this because most of the content is there in the report, but we'll just pull out some highlights for you. So really to say that engagement and comms activity has primarily focused since the last board meeting, as usual, on supporting the technical work programme, but particularly now looking at the preparation as we move towards the strategic investment plan, specifically for us around the consultation process, as well as supporting our new members to understand the processes we're going through at the moment as we lead towards the SIP development. We continue to work hard to build relationships with both our current and new stakeholders. It's fair to say that TFSE is becoming ever more popular. Since the publication of the transport strategy, there is more and more interest in the work that we do, and it's almost a daily request now for new people to join forums or to be briefed on the work that we're undertaking, which is great. We have just under 3,000 individuals now and 950 organisations that we are in regular contact with. They are held on our database and signed up to our work, so that is a great comms and engagement channel. All of our activity, as this board meeting is, has continued to be virtual since the last board meeting. But for us, actually, that has had some really positive impact in terms of increased engagement. We've seen a much greater uptake in attendance at all of our meetings across the technical work programme, primarily because it's much easier for people to dial in than it is for them to travel, as was mentioned earlier on. As Councillor Glazier also mentioned in his introduction earlier, we have welcomed 5 new board members since the last board meeting and 1 change to our district and borough councillor representation. All of those new members, with the exception of Councillor Colin Kemp, who already fully understands the work of TFSE, have received individual one-to-one briefings from myself and Councillor Glazier. Sarah mentioned the number of meetings that are underway at the moment regarding the technical work programme. They are still numerous, it is fair to say. However, we have worked hard to carefully plan the remainder of 2021 meetings, and as Sarah alluded to, we have cancelled a number and streamlined some of the others. We are very aware of the risk of stakeholder fatigue with the number of meetings that we're asking people to attend at the moment, but we are doing our best to ensure that they're held at key points in the programme where the most value can be gained from people attending. So just to reiterate on that point, that we are extremely grateful, we continue to be extremely grateful, both to the board and to officers within our constituent authorities and other key partners for your continued support and attendance and engagement with these meetings. And it isn't just the meetings, it's the work that follows on from them. So thank you very much. The University Steering Group has met twice since the previous meeting, once in February and then again last week. That continues to be a really engaged, useful group, a very good forum. It's the only time that the region's universities all get together at the same place and the same time. Last week, we had two very good speakers from the DfT who provided briefings on Great British Railways and also Bus Back Better. That was requested by the university attendees. Just to say on that point that they are meeting again in September, and as always, board members and other interested colleagues are very, very welcome to join us if they would like. Private sector engagement continues at a pace. We have increasing private sector involvement in a number of our stakeholder forums, including freight, but we do have our standalone private sector group. They are meeting again in October and continue to look at a fairly varied work package. Mark has already mentioned that we have established a regional transport decarbonisation forum. That, again, very well received. It's the only time that officers and other interested parties with responsibility for decarbonisation, climate change and sustainability meet within our region. So that's something new. It has been very positively received and we are keen to carry that on. The next meeting is on the 6th of August for that one. Linked to the decarbonisation agenda, we have also coordinated a transport decarbonisation survey as a piece of work on behalf of all 7 subnational transport bodies, the results of which will be eventually submitted to DfT. Had a very good response rate to that, 59 authorities from England, and we've got some good headline findings. As has already been mentioned, a targeted engagement exercise with district and borough colleagues has been well underway. We have done 4 out of 5 sessions, with the final one, which is Kent, tomorrow. Really, the agenda for that is to build better links with our district and borough colleagues, both officers and members, and really to establish and embed that golden thread approach between local plans, local transport plans, and the TFSE transport strategy, leading, of course, to the contents of the SIP. We've spoken to around 90 members and officers, probably about 80% of those were completely new to TFSE, so it's been very worthwhile, and thank you to everybody, board members and officers who have supported those regionally. There have been a number of fairly large events since the last board meeting. We had a virtual Mobility 2050 event in March, 130 attendees to that, representing more than 100 organisations. Very well received. It was an opportunity to share key themes from the future mobility strategy that you have heard about today. We also attended the ITT Hub Future Transport Conference in July 2021. Personally, found that very exciting because it was the first time I had been out anywhere for what felt like a year. It was a live conference, very well run within COVID regulations, but it was genuinely really nice to be able to speak face to face with stakeholders. That was held at Farnborough. It was the first major transport industry conference and exhibition to take place physically for almost 18 months. So I think my excitement was justified. Again, it was very well received. Rupert took part in a session on the future of passenger transport, and there were leaders there from transport, logistics and energy sectors. And that event is already confirmed again for next year, which is great. We are starting to think about a potential launch for our freight logistics and international gateway strategy, which is likely to be in November of this year. And that's pretty much it for events. Just finally to say that there have been a number of media responses issued. The press releases, if you haven't received them, are all published on our website. But we have responded to several fairly major news items recently, including the William Shapps review and the Great British Railway review of strategy. So just to conclude, it's the recommendation, which is a very basic one, that the members of the Partnership Board note the engagement and communication activity that has been undertaken since our last meeting in January 21.
Thank you, Lucy. Any questions or comments?
Very good.
Again, Rob. You're muted, Rob, unfortunately.
Well, I had to do it once, didn't I? Apologies. Well done to Lucy. It's just, I'm wondering, I see we've done quite a bit with our MPs, and I wonder if it's time to ramp that up in terms of levelling up, and us also being one voice and joined up. I know the LEPs are doing this, and some of our districts and borough colleagues on Enterprise M3 have drafted a letter to the Secretary of State, and we're moulding that round each individual authority to send them in individually as well. But, you know, there could never be a more important time to do that, could there? So I remember when George Hollery was MP, so George now, he said, Rob, if you don't tell us, we think everything's okay. Now, I know they've already got that message, but I do think it's time we've ramped up our conversations and our lobbying to the MPs, I would have thought. I don't know what others think. I just think if we don't do it now, it's an opportunity missed.
Very good point, and I'm sure we can work on that. Lucy?
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point, Councillor Humby, and it's something that we've recognised in the draft of the consultation and engagement plan that we are developing now as we prepare for the SIP. I think there is a question around timing for the MPs and whether we do it virtually or face-to-face, whether we do it with some sort of reception, whether we risk Portcullis House again as we have done in the past, or whether we try again with our virtual briefings, which from the people that have attended, the MPs that attended were very positive about them. They were very well received, but it's encouraging MPs to attend. And I think we're really going to be calling for help from all of our board members to encourage that attendance. I think potentially October, November time, possibly could be a good time to start thinking about those briefings. So yes, definitely in the plan, and thank you in advance for any support you can give us.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll note the engagement as printed. Thank you. On to 14, which is the Transport Forum update. Jeff, please.
Yeah, just a few words really, Keith, by this stage of the afternoon. The meetings continue. They're fulfilling their natural role of sharing knowledge and extending knowledge, and that's going quite well, I think. One slight conundrum, I think, we obviously want to discuss what members of the forum want to discuss. That's part and parcel of the whole thing. If we're not careful, sometimes the Transport Forum members take us quite a long way into detail. You know, an example being the bus stop outside my house is a bit muddy, sort of thing, that sort of thing. So we're trying to strike the balance between not over directing the discussion, but equally not letting it break down into things that are relatively minor. So that's fine. And it's almost just one with other things that have been said during today's meeting. The next meeting of the Transport Forum is all going to be about carbon assessment, carbon budgeting, and working on decarbonisation. So very much consistent with almost everything else that has been discussed this afternoon. And other than that, please note the report, and thank you for entrusting the forum to me for another year.
Well, we really do appreciate the work you put in, Jeff, so thank you for that. Are there any questions for Jeff, comments?
Good.
Sounds to me as though you're doing a good job, Jeff. Thank you again. Responses to consultation, 15. Rupert?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So in your paper, you can see that we've prepared a number of responses to a range of recent consultations that have taken place between board meetings. And the report lists 9 responses to various consultations, including Transport Select Committee, DFT, a number of local authorities, and some specific consultations, such as the London Borough of Sutton's bid to rebuild the Belmont Loop. The detail of the responses is all set out within your papers, and the recommendations are to seek the board endorsement of the responses to the 9 consultations. I'm very happy, Chairman, to take any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? I think the process seems to work well in as much as these do come in ad hoc, and we have to formulate a response and then ratify them here. Ian and then Daniel, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wondered what the criteria were for deciding which consultations to respond on. I mean, presumably there must be a lot more than you can cope with in terms of transport consultations within the Southeast. So how do you prioritise?
So that's a good question, Ian. Some are directly related to the activities of Transport for the Southeast. So things like select committee inquiries are a good example of something that generally we want to respond to. There's been a number of local transport plans, so local transport authority consultations on their local transport plan, which I think is absolutely relevant for us to provide a response to. And then sometimes we get requests from partners or organisations. So, for example, the London Borough Sutton one is a good example of where the chairman was written to and asked whether we would support this. And if it's compatible with Transport for the South East strategic objectives, then ordinarily we're unlikely to say no. It does mean, and you're absolutely right, there is a lot out there, and sometimes it's a bit of judgment employed as to whether we do a response. You know, like all of these things, it takes time to pull together a response. We're very fortunate in that senior officer colleagues across the group are extremely helpful in providing information and sometimes doing the work to help bring responses together.
Do you know offhand if you're responding, if TFSE is responding to M3 Junction 9 proposals?
I don't know, actually. Mark, do you know that one?
A34 and M3 Junction. Highways England.
I don't think, has anything specific come forward as I wasn't aware that there was anything, a consultation proposal out for comment.
I thought it was out there at the moment.
Not that I'm aware. We can certainly check that through.
We'll check on that one, Ian.
Thanks.
Daniel, was your hand up? It's disappeared. So
it was, but I took it down because Ian asked exactly the question I was going to ask.
Okay.
I'll only add one bit. There was a consultation from the Centre for Connected and Autonomous Vehicles, BEIS, which was for submission on Friday last week. You clearly didn't submit that one. I'm just so I wonder specifically on that one, why not?
I do recall the consultation, but I think it was quite technology focused rather than it was more of a technology based flavour to it than rather a policy. If I recall it.
If it was, then I'll give that feedback to CCAV because that wasn't what they intended. And it may be worth keeping an eye open for, because there are regional. The idea is that they want to expand for regional deployment of these kind of services based on the technologies you're talking about. Okay.
And Chairman, if I might just add, if board members or indeed senior officers feel that there's something on the horizon that they're aware of, or you pick up and you think we should be responding, then please, by all means, let us know. We're not bad, but we do miss things sometimes.
Yeah, understandably. So not a criticism, but I will relay that. Thank you.
Sorry, if I can come back quickly, Keith, I just did a double check, and the consultation on M3 Junction 9 closed on July the 19th.
All right.
So it's on the horizon.
Right. Well, we've got a message there now, and please forward. If it comes in from 2 or 3 people, it's better than not having it in at all, if it's important to us. So thank you for that. I've lost my screen. So we've got Rupert and then Martin. Thank you. Rupert.
Thanks, Keith. I I'm just wondering, coming up on the horizon, the government seems to have announced that it's going to be looking again at its road investment strategy, which it allocated, I think it was 27 billion, and it's being challenged in the High Court by Transport Action Network. And there, the government are thinking that with the rise in home working and online shopping, that will be an interesting one that's coming up. They seem to be reopening that, and obviously, if the overall budget is going down, then it might affect individual plans. So I'm just wondering if that's on the horizon yet.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're obviously watching with interest on challenges to the RIS. We keep close with Highways England, as we do Network Rail. We are working with Highways England on the thinking around RIS2, so the third RIS. And clearly the outcome from any challenges and judicial hearings will factor into the DfT and Highways England's thinking around the third RIS.
Thank you. Martin.
Thanks, Keith. Yeah, thanks, Rupert. It's really maybe not so much a formal consultation as an engagement question, but at the LEP recently received a letter from Network Rail about the review of the Croydon elements of the Brighton Main Line situation. You know, the junction capacity or junctions capacity, and obviously the station overhaul. Big piece of the puzzle for improving the Brighton Main Line, and the with a view to reviewing the situation and the business case in the light of the pandemic, and to quote the letter, you know, to make sure it's a much more robust business case in the light of the current situation. So I'm just wondering to what extent TFSC has been engaging in that kind of conversation, and if not, is it something we could get on the same page with, given it's so critically important to the economy of the certainly the coastal capital LEP area, if not the wider region.
Yeah, I'd share those points, Martin. You know, it's disappointing to see that, you know, it's potentially going to be deferred. I think that's what I read into it.
Yeah.
I think the business case for it is strong. I think there's a very real risk that we all end up crystal ball gazing into, you know, what the pandemic does for, you know, passenger numbers at peak times. I think, you know, there's clearly a continuing willingness to invest in the Brighton Main Line. I mean, I see that you probably clock the blockade that they're putting on in the summer period to undertake improvement work, and we'll keep making the case. Although it's ever so slightly outside of our geography, the wider benefits of the Windmill Junction at Croydon are, you know, potentially significant. And if you steps back to the debate we were having earlier around the decarbonisation agenda and story, you know, we are going to need to see an uplift in both bus and rail capacity in order to meet some of our decarbonisation and modal shift aims. So, you know, we'll play into that also with our colleagues in TfL as well.
Okay, thanks for that. I mean, perhaps could get in touch offline and just compare a few notes on that topic. So it's really important one for us. Thank you.
Stuart.
Just to introduce myself as Director of Regional Planning for Network Rail, and to echo what Rupert said, I think that would be a helpful thing to support if you could do that.
Thank you, Stuart. Any other questions or comments? So do we agree the paper is printed? There's an awful lot of responses there. Thank you very much. Brings us to agenda item 16, which is any other business. Does anyone else have anything they wish to raise? Rob, followed by Rupert.
Yeah, just very, very quickly, been to several meetings recently where we've talked about tech risk and the speed and advancement of technology. And I thought about this earlier with some of the previous papers on mobility strategies. I've heard this sort of comment tech risk quite a bit recently. You know, it's the risk of sort of not enhancing it and embracing it in everything we do, certainly around transport. And then obviously the risk of potentially adopting, you can't really call it the wrong technology, but I mean, it's just to be an aware and an understanding of it. And I know, Keith, you've heard this before from me, but My grandfather was born in 1903, before the Wright brothers' first flight. And 66 years later, guess what? We landed on the moon. And then when you think of the rate or the increase in speed and technology, or the advancement of it, when we start talking about AI, now let's talk about quantum AI and everything else, it's how do you start to think about accommodating what we're planning now, and that balance between what you adopt and you can't wait, but it's just trying to have that understanding of that. It's a bit like I'm thinking of investing in a skip company, because won't be very long before there'll be skips all across the country being filled up with cables that you used to plug your cars into, because it will, that won't be like that all of a sudden. It will be induction charging. It's just that sort of comment that everything we do, we must consider that. I haven't got the answers to it, but the rate of increase is just astronomical at the moment. When you get into, as I say, into quantum AI, the rate of increase is just going to blow everybody's mind, and we just need to be aware of it. It's just a bit of a I got on my soapbox like you, Keith. I don't think we consider it enough, but I haven't got the answers to what we do about it. Thank you.
A very good point. Well, if I take 2 or 3, and this, unless anyone wants to chip in on that specifically,
yeah,
okay.
I'd like to come back to Rob on that. It's Ian. Rob,
Ian, you go now, and then I'll come to Rupert after that.
Thanks, Rob. I think that's very thought-provoking, and as a long-standing science fiction aficionado, I think we should have a session on futurology.
Okay, we've got the answer there then. I'll see if I can get what's his name, the Doctor Who lives down the road. I'll bring him along, because he must have all the answers. Thank you. Seriously, I mean, if you date to the fact that, and you all know I've been a councillor far too long. In 97, in 95, I was asked if I wanted a computer, and I said, what the bloody hell would I want a computer for? Now I can't leave home without a laptop and 2 phones. It's life is moving on, Rob. We're all embracing it.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, Rupert. Over to you.
No, not at all. I'm just wondering, and I may have missed out a lot because I don't go to many of these meetings, but where are we integrating ports with our transport network? Because I've been to visit Chatham Dockyard locally, and I was amazed at how green that form of transport is, for example, and how that the ports can be a location where some processing goes on shore, and then they get back on another boat and gets taken somewhere else, and avoids the road network altogether, which is a green solution. And that some of those are under threat, because port sides have also traditionally in the last 10-20 years been used to turn into housing, thereby the port capacity disappears. And the government does seem quite keen on ports. It's got the Free Ports Initiative, etc. So it seems to me it's an important part of the transport network to integrate. So do we have I just don't seem we haven't mentioned it today, so is it part of our thinking?
Very much so, and Rupert Clubb will chip in, I'm sure. I've made now 2 visits to Southampton to talk to Alistair, who runs the port of Southampton. Here in my own bit, we've got Rye, we've got Newhaven. It does play a key feature, and of course, as you know, with the major links to Europe, we've got Dover, and so it does form a big part of what we do. Rupert, do you want to add, because I don't think we've actually really got into Chatham yet, have we?
No, I mean, ports and those sort of international gateways in particular. So, as well as some of the smaller ports, Heathrow and Gatwick are integral, and particularly important in terms of levelling up debate. And if you're operating in the Midlands of the North, there's a fair chance you'll be moving goods and services out of some of our key ports. And Southampton's a cracking example of that, particularly in terms of sustainability. The way they use rail straight into the port to move stuff out and up to the Midlands, particularly vehicles, is really illustrative. And Rupert, it's an interesting debate. I don't know, some of you might have caught, was a Radio 4 programme where they do random postcodes, and they were talking about Lowestoft, and the decline of the port in Lowestoft and how it's changing. and things like town deals and how they can help revitalise some of the what I'd call these older ports that have perhaps, speaking frankly, they've probably known better days. How do they integrate in and the like. So really interested in having a follow-up conversation with you, specifically about Chatham Dockyard, but just to reassure you that ports and airports are integral to the sort of international gateway MO, if you like, for Transport for the South East.
Okay, I don't seem to have any more hands up. Is there anyone else? Last call for any other business? No. Well, thank you very much. So the last bit is Future Roles and Responsibility Board workshop will be held on Monday the 13th of September, 2 o'clock till 4, or 1400 till 1600. I've got to catch up. Held in private venue to be confirmed, and the board meeting is Monday the 18th of September from 1300 to 1600, again venue to be confirmed. So we'll keep an eye on that. Can I thank all of you for turning up today and all the contributors? I mean, I think what we can see is that the work of Transport for the South East goes from strength to strength, and we are becoming not only more recognised but more useful. Through the all-party group on infrastructure and the Institute of Civil Engineers, I was invited just yesterday as chairman of your board to listen to and have a conversation with Peter Hendy on the Union Connectivity Review. And when you actually recognise that I was the only three of us there representing local transport forums, I think that that's a great credit to the people that that get the invites, and I know Jeff is well involved in that. But to have the opportunity to see what's going on at that level, and Sir Peter's writing a paper for the Prime Minister on how to link up all of these parts, and when you have that conversation, I just believe that whatever it is we want to achieve, we can if we work together, one voice, and keep going. So a genuine thank you to the staff and all the work they've done. Thank you for your attendance today, and I look forward to seeing you all, hopefully in person, very soon.
Thanks, Keith.
Cheers.
Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a good summer, Keith. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keith. All the best.
So that, Colin. Good to see you.
Cheers.